Chosen 1. The moment an individual stops reacting in expected ways, attention shifts. This attention is not accidental, and it is rarely casual. In social behavior studies, heightened observation typically begins when someone deviates from an assumed pattern. People do not closely monitor others without reason. They do not replay conversations, analyze tone, or quietly note timing unless something about that person disrupts expectation. What often appears as curiosity is, in reality, a response to uncertainty. Human behavior is largely guided by prediction. In everyday interactions, people subconsciously forecast how others will respond to pressure, conflict, or disadvantage. These forecasts create a sense of control and familiarity. When an individual behaves outside those projections, it creates discomfort. That discomfort prompts scrutiny. This is not a phenomenon limited to extreme situations. It appears in workplaces, families, communities, and social circles. When someone remains composed where reaction is expected, or progresses steadily where collapse was assumed, attention intensifies. The response is not admiration in the traditional sense, nor is it hostility. It is confusion mixed with disbelief. Research in behavioral psychology has consistently shown that people fixate most on individuals who disrupt predictive models. These are not necessarily the loudest or most visible figures. In fact, overt behavior is often easier to categorize and dismiss. The individuals who attract the most sustained observation are those who remain calm, consistent, and self-directed under pressure. Their behavior offers fewer emotional signals to interpret, which makes them harder to read and therefore more mentally demanding to process. In institutional settings, this principle explains why analysts focus on anomalies rather than averages. Systems are built to manage predictable behavior. When an outcome cannot be easily classified, it draws attention. This same logic operates socially. When someone does not respond as expected to unfairness, loss, or challenge, observers begin to study the pattern rather than the event itself. In practical terms, this often begins after moments of strain. Pressure enters a situation, and observers anticipate a visible reaction. They expect defensiveness, emotional expression, withdrawal, or escalation. When none of these occur, the absence itself becomes notable. Silence, when contrasted with expectation, communicates more than reaction. This lack of visible disruption unsettles people because it removes familiar reference points. Many social dynamics depend on emotional exchange. Sympathy, judgment, reassurance, and hierarchy often rely on visible struggle. When struggle is not publicly displayed, the usual social mechanisms fail to activate. At this point, observation replaces interaction. Individuals begin to notice details they previously ignored. Timing of responses, consistency of behavior, changes in priorities, and even silence are examined for meaning. This monitoring is rarely conscious. Most people do not recognize that they are tracking someone's behavior more closely. They simply feel compelled to figure it out. What makes this dynamic particularly persistent is that the individual being observed is often doing very little differently on the surface. There is no announcement of resilience, no performance of strength, and no effort to provoke attention. Progress occurs quietly. Boundaries are maintained without explanation. Daily routines continue without visible disruption. That normalcy is what intensifies the attention. Survival without public struggle disrupts a widely held assumption that hardship must be visible to be legitimate. Many people associate endurance with expression. They expect difficulty to manifest outwardly. When it does not, they begin to question their assumptions about strength and coping. This is where fixation begins to develop. The observers are not seeking to imitate the behavior. They are attempting to understand how the expected outcome failed to occur. In their internal logic, pressure should produce breakdown, resentment, or visible change. When it does not, the explanation must be found elsewhere. Often, this leads to retrospective analysis. Past interactions are replayed. Statements are reconsidered. Minor details are elevated in importance. The observers search for a hidden factor that explains the deviation. They want to locate the reason the system did not function as expected. At the same time, an internal comparison begins to take shape. Observers measure the individual's response against their own past reactions to difficulty. This comparison is rarely favorable. Most people can identify moments where pressure altered their behavior, slowed progress, or redirected their path. Seeing someone move forward without those visible consequences introduces discomfort. This discomfort is not rooted in jealousy alone. It is rooted in cognitive dissonance. When someone's lived experience contradicts a belief that has been used to justify personal limitations, the belief becomes unstable. The easiest way to restore stability is to externalize the difference. Observers look for an advantage, a hidden resource, or an explanation that allows them to maintain their original belief. This is why attention feels intense rather than fleeting. The individual becomes an unresolved case. Their presence challenges a narrative that once felt secure. As long as the explanation remains unclear, the observation continues. Another factor contributing to this fixation is the breakdown of narrative control. People construct informal stories about those around them. These stories help organize social expectations. They include assumptions about competence, resilience, ambition, and limits. These narratives are not malicious. They are cognitive shortcuts. When someone behaves outside the assigned narrative, it disrupts the shortcut. The story no longer predicts behavior accurately. This creates a gap that the mind seeks to close. The more consistently the individual deviates from expectation, the harder it becomes to maintain the original narrative. This disruption unfolds gradually. There is rarely a single moment where the narrative collapses. Instead, small inconsistencies accumulate. The individual does not falter when anticipated. They do not seek reassurance. They do not adjust behavior to restore comfort. Over time, the observers realize their story no longer applies. At that point, attention shifts from outcome to process. Observers begin analyzing how decisions are made rather than what decisions are made. They note composure, timing, restraint, and boundaries. These elements are difficult to quantify, which increases frustration. The fixation deepens because the usual metrics fail. Success is not being loudly claimed. Struggle is not being publicly narrated. There are no clear markers to measure. Without these, comparison becomes ineffective. Comparison is one of the primary tools people use to regulate self-worth. It relies on visible differences and shared benchmarks. When someone does not participate in those benchmarks, comparison loses power. This forces observers to seek alternative ways to understand their position relative to the individual. As a result, attention becomes investigative rather than evaluative. Observers gather information not to compete, but to regain orientation. They want to know where they stand. They want reassurance that the world still operates according to rules they understand. This explains why observation often focuses on reactions rather than achievements. Achievements can be contextualized. Reactions reveal internal regulation. When someone consistently responds calmly to pressure, it signals a level of internal stability that cannot be easily dismissed. Calm behavior under strain removes a common social leverage point. Emotional escalation allows others to engage, intervene, or assert influence. Restraint denies that opportunity. Without visible reaction, observers are left without a role to play. This absence of engagement is often interpreted as strategy, even when it is simply composure. Observers assume there must be a hidden motive or advantage. They look for signs of manipulation or calculation, When none appear, uncertainty increases. Uncertainty, more than dislike or admiration, sustains fixation. People are driven to resolve ambiguity. When resolution is not available, attention persists. Another element contributing to sustained observation is the search for vulnerability. When someone appears unaffected by pressure, observers may look for moments of weakness to restore equilibrium. They want confirmation that resilience has limits. This search is rarely malicious. It is driven by a need to normalize the individual's experience. If a breaking point can be identified, the deviation can be explained away. If not, the challenge to existing beliefs remains unresolved. At the same time, the individual's calm behavior often prevents escalation. Without emotional cues, interactions remain neutral. This neutrality denies closure. Observers do not receive the reaction they anticipate, which prolongs attention. Over time, this dynamic creates a feedback loop. The less reaction the individual provides, the more observers watch. The more they watch, the more they expect a reaction. When none arrives, fixation intensifies. Importantly, this process has little to do with approval. In many cases, observers are unsettled precisely because their approval is irrelevant. The individual's behavior suggests self-direction rather than external validation. Approval functions as a subtle form of influence. When it matters, it creates leverage. When it does not, influence diminishes. People often overestimate how much control approval provides until they encounter someone who does not seek it. When observers realize their opinions do not alter behavior, attention shifts again. They begin looking for alternative points of influence. This can include monitoring decisions, relationships, or changes in routine. The goal is not to intervene, but to understand why influence is ineffective. This realization further destabilizes comparison. Without approval as a metric, hierarchy becomes unclear. The individual no longer occupies a predictable position within the social structure. This ambiguity sustains attention. As fixation continues, observers often misinterpret composure as detachment or superiority. In reality, composure is frequently the result of internal regulation rather than disregard. However, without visible explanation, assumptions fill the gap. The individual's continued progress reinforces the disruption. Movement without validation, explanation, or performance challenges conventional assumptions about motivation. Observers struggle to reconcile this with their own experiences. This leads to repeated analysis of past behavior. People search for evidence that the individual received help, advantage, or exception. Any explanation that preserves the belief that outcomes are predictable is preferred. When none is found, the fixation persists. The individual becomes a reminder that not all outcomes are controllable or reversible. This realization can be deeply unsettling. At this stage, observation is no longer about the individual's actions. It is about the observer's need for reassurance. They are attempting to confirm that their worldview still holds. The more the individual continues without disruption, the more difficult the confirmation becomes. This is where the first phase of sustained fixation solidifies. Attention has shifted from momentary curiosity to ongoing analysis. The individual is no longer just a person. They are a contradiction that has not been resolved, and as long as that contradiction remains unexplained, observation continues. The continuation of this dynamic often produces a quiet shift in behavior among those observing. Once initial explanations fail, observers begin adjusting their expectations. They stop waiting for collapse or visible reaction and instead monitor consistency. What they are testing, often unconsciously, is durability. Temporary composure can be dismissed. Sustained composure cannot. Durability introduces a different kind of pressure. It suggests that the individual's behavior is not situational but structural. This realization changes the nature of observation. The focus moves from when will this end to how is this maintained. At this stage, attention becomes less emotional and more analytical. People begin to notice patterns rather than moments. They observe how the individual handles routine tasks, manages time, and responds to minor inconveniences. These details matter because they reveal whether resilience is limited to major challenges or embedded in everyday behavior. Consistency across contexts reinforces the perception of internal regulation. This is also where assumptions about motivation begin to erode. Many people believe that persistence requires visible incentives such as recognition, reassurance, or external pressure. When someone continues without these, observers struggle to identify the driving force. The absence of visible motivation challenges a common belief that effort must be externally rewarded. As a result, observers may attribute intention where there is simply alignment. They assume strategy where there is coherence. This misinterpretation is common because alignment is difficult to observe directly. It does not announce itself. It manifests through restraint, timing, and selective engagement. Selective engagement is particularly noticeable. The individual does not respond to every provocation, opportunity, or request. Choices appear deliberate rather than reactive. This selectivity further disrupts expectations because it contrasts with the common tendency to over-explain or over-commit. When explanations are not provided, people often fill the gap with speculation. They look for hidden agendas or long-term plans. This speculation keeps attention anchored even in the absence of new information. Silence becomes a canvas onto which others project meaning. At this point, the individual's internal stability begins to affect external dynamics. Conversations change tone. Interactions become more cautious. People hesitate before making assumptions or issuing judgments. This shift is subtle but significant. It reflects an adjustment in perceived authority. Authority here does not stem from position or assertion. It emerges from predictability. When someone's behavior remains stable across varying conditions, it signals reliability. Reliability, over time, becomes a form of influence. This influence operates quietly. It does not demand agreement or compliance. It shapes expectations. Others begin to anticipate calm responses and measured decisions. This anticipation alters how they approach the individual. In group settings, this can lead to unspoken deference. Not because the individual seeks it, but because uncertainty encourages caution. People are less likely to provoke or challenge when outcomes are unclear. The absence of reaction becomes a deterrent to unnecessary conflict. This shift can also expose insecurity in others. When one person does not rely on validation, it highlights how much validation others require. This contrast is rarely comfortable. It prompts self-evaluation, even if briefly. Self-evaluation often leads to defensiveness. Some observers may attempt to minimize the individual's behavior by reframing it as indifference or luck. These narratives serve to protect self-image. However, they are difficult to sustain when evidence accumulates. Evidence accumulates through time. Consistent behavior under varying conditions gradually undermines dismissive explanations. The longer the pattern holds, the less plausible alternative narratives become. This is where fixation transitions into acceptance for some observers. They stop trying to explain away the behavior and begin incorporating it into their understanding of what is possible. For others, fixation intensifies because acceptance would require revising deeply held beliefs. Beliefs about fairness, effort, and outcome are often personal. They are shaped by experience and used to justify past decisions. When someone's behavior challenges these beliefs, the discomfort can be significant. To manage this discomfort, observers may distance themselves. Attention decreases not because understanding has been achieved, but because unresolved contradiction becomes tiring. This withdrawal is not always visible. It may appear as reduced interaction or passive observation. For those who continue to watch, the focus often shifts again, this time toward long-term trajectory. Short-term reactions lose relevance. Observers begin asking different questions internally. They wonder how far this stability extends and what it will eventually lead to. Trajectory introduces a new dimension of comparison. Instead of measuring immediate outcomes, people consider potential futures. This can amplify unease because it introduces uncertainty about relative position over time. The individual's refusal to engage in speculation or projection reinforces this uncertainty. Without commentary or signaling, observers lack data. The future remains undefined, which sustains attention. At the same time, the individual often becomes more internally focused. With external noise diminishing in importance, attention turns toward refinement rather than defense. Energy is allocated based on priority rather than pressure. This internal focus further reduces reactive behavior. Decisions are made with longer time horizons in mind. Short-term validation becomes less relevant. This shift is often mistaken for detachment, but it is more accurately described as recalibration. Recalibration involves reassessing commitments, boundaries, and values. It is a natural response to sustained pressure without disruption. Once survival is no longer the primary concern, optimization becomes possible. Optimization does not seek visibility. It seeks efficiency. Actions are chosen based on impact rather than appearance. This can make progress less noticeable to outsiders, even as it becomes more effective. Observers who expect visible markers of success may misinterpret this phase as stagnation. However, those paying closer attention may notice incremental improvements and strategic positioning. Strategic positioning is another area that attracts attention. It involves placing effort where it yields the greatest return over time. This often includes withdrawing from low-impact engagements and investing in foundational elements. Foundational work is rarely impressive on the surface. It involves systems, habits, and internal frameworks. Because these are not easily observed, they invite speculation. Speculation persists because it provides a sense of participation. Observers feel involved by forming theories, even if they lack evidence. This mental engagement sustains fixation without requiring interaction. Over time, however, outcomes begin to surface. Not as dramatic shifts, but as steady progress. These outcomes validate the earlier composure retroactively. Observers reinterpret past behavior in light of current results. This reinterpretation often leads to a reassessment of earlier judgments. Behaviors once seen as passive or indifferent are reframed as disciplined or intentional. This shift can be uncomfortable, especially if it contradicts previous opinions. For some, this discomfort leads to quiet respect. For others, it leads to disengagement. Admitting misjudgment requires humility, which not everyone is willing to exercise. The individual's response to this shift is typically minimal. There is no correction or acknowledgement. Progress continues without commentary. This reinforces the perception that external perception is not the primary driver. At this stage, fixation may transform into reference. Observers begin using the individual as a point of comparison, even if privately. They measure their own reactions and decisions against the observed behavior. This reference role is powerful because it influences behavior indirectly. It does not require interaction. It shapes standards. Over time, it can alter norms within a group or environment. However, this influence remains limited by proximity. Those closest to the individual are most affected. Distant observers may retain simplified narratives. The individual's challenge during this phase is not external scrutiny, but internal drift. Sustained composure can lead to complacency if not actively maintained. Without deliberate reflection, alignment can erode quietly. This is why internal review becomes important. Decisions are revisited. Priorities are reassessed. Alignment is treated as an ongoing process rather than a fixed state. The absence of external pressure does not eliminate the need for discipline. In fact, it increases it. Without opposition or validation, self-regulation becomes the primary stabilizing force. Self-regulation operates through habits rather than motivation. It relies on systems that function regardless of mood or circumstance. This reduces variability and preserves direction. Observers rarely see this work. They see outcomes without understanding the maintenance behind them. This gap between perception and reality contributes to continued misunderstanding. Misunderstanding does not necessarily lead to conflict. Often, it results in distance. People accept what they cannot explain and move on. This reduces noise and frees attention. For the individual, this reduction in external focus allows deeper concentration. Energy previously spent managing perception is redirected toward execution. Execution becomes quieter and more effective. Goals are pursued methodically. Progress is measured internally rather than announced. This internal measurement reinforces autonomy. Decisions are evaluated based on alignment with long-term intent rather than immediate response. Over time, this approach compounds. Small, consistent actions accumulate. Stability increases. Capacity expands. Observers who remain attentive may notice this compounding effect. Those who do often adjust their expectations again. They stop anticipating disruption altogether. At this point, fixation loses its original intensity. The individual is no longer a contradiction to be resolved. They become an example of an alternative operating model. This alternative does not replace existing models universally. It simply demonstrates that different approaches are possible. For some observers, this realization is enough. For others, it remains unsettling. However, the absence of engagement limits its impact. Without interaction, fixation fades. The individual's journey continues regardless of observation. External attention becomes incidental rather than influential. What remains is sustained alignment, not as an abstract concept, but as a practical state. Behavior, decision-making, and focus remain consistent. This consistency does not guarantee ease. Challenges continue to arise. However, they are addressed without destabilization. The absence of dramatic reaction becomes a defining feature. It signals that internal structures are functioning as intended. Over time, this stability becomes unremarkable. It integrates into daily life. The individual no longer stands out because of reaction or resistance, but because of reliability. Reliability, in many contexts, is the highest form of influence. It builds trust without demand. It sustains progress without noise. And as reliability becomes established, fixation loses its purpose. Attention moves elsewhere. The individual remains aligned, and the system adjusts accordingly, as this phase settles. What becomes most evident is the quiet normalization of strength. What once felt deliberate now feels natural. The discipline that required effort earlier turns into default behavior. Choices align almost automatically, not because options have disappeared, but because clarity has reduced internal debate. This is not rigidity. It is efficiency born from understanding. In this stage, the individual no longer measures progress by external milestones alone. Success is evaluated by stability, sustainability, and internal coherence. There is less urgency to prove, explain, or accelerate. Time is treated as an ally rather than an enemy. Decisions are made with patience because the fear of falling behind has lost its grip. One of the most significant shifts here is the relationship with uncertainty. Earlier, uncertainty demanded response. Now it is simply acknowledged. Unknown outcomes are not immediately resolved or avoided. They are held, observed, and allowed to unfold. This tolerance for ambiguity is a marker of maturity. It reflects confidence in one's ability to adapt without panic. As a result, reactions slow down further. Not out of hesitation, but out of discernment. The individual no longer responds to every stimulus. Energy is conserved and directed with intention. This creates space for deeper focus and long-term thinking. Long-term thinking alters priorities. Immediate gratification loses appeal. Short-term wins are evaluated against long-term cost. This does not mean pleasure or rest are denied, but they are chosen consciously rather than impulsively. Balance becomes strategic rather than reactive. Relationships also continue to evolve in this phase. Interactions become cleaner. Expectations are clearer, even when unspoken. The individual no longer overextends to maintain connection. This does not reduce care. It refines it. Time and attention are offered where reciprocity and alignment exist. Some connections strengthen quietly during this period. These are often relationships built on mutual respect rather than dependency. They do not require constant reassurance or performance. Others fade without conflict. Their absence is noted, but not resisted. This natural pruning creates emotional space. With fewer obligations driven by guilt or habit, emotional energy stabilizes. The individual feels less fragmented. Attention is no longer divided across competing demands that lack purpose. Internally, reflection deepens. Not in the form of rumination, but evaluation. Past decisions are reviewed without judgment. Lessons are integrated without self-criticism. This allows experience to become wisdom rather than burden. Wisdom here is practical. It informs boundaries, pacing, and expectations. It does not demand recognition. It simply shapes behavior. Over time, this creates a sense of quiet authority within the self. This internal authority reduces the need for external structure. Rules imposed from outside lose relevance when internal standards are clear. The individual becomes self-governing. Accountability is internalized. With this autonomy comes responsibility. Without external pressure, there is no one else to blame for stagnation or misalignment. This accountability is accepted rather than avoided. It reinforces discipline. Discipline, at this stage, is no longer forceful. It is embedded. Habits support direction. Systems reduce friction. Progress continues even on days when motivation is low. This consistency protects momentum. Momentum now feels steady rather than explosive. Growth is incremental but reliable. There are fewer spikes and crashes. This steadiness allows for better planning and execution. Externally, results may appear modest at first glance. There are no dramatic announcements or sudden transformations. However, when viewed over time, the trajectory is clear. The distance traveled becomes undeniable. Observers who re-enter at this point often experience surprise. The absence of spectacle led them to underestimate progress. This surprise reinforces the earlier lesson that visibility is not proportional to impact. The individual does not correct these assumptions. There is no need. Explanation would add noise without benefit. Progress speaks when it is ready. This restraint preserves energy. Communication becomes purposeful rather than habitual. Words are chosen carefully. Silence is used intentionally. Silence here is not withdrawal. It is selectivity. It ensures that when communication occurs, it carries weight. This increases effectiveness without increasing volume. As the final stage unfolds, The individual's focus shifts from protection to contribution. Once stability is established, attention naturally turns outward. The question changes from how do I maintain alignment to how do I apply it. Application does not necessarily mean leadership or visibility. It can take many forms. It may involve mentorship, creation, or quiet influence. The key is that action is grounded rather than compensatory. Contribution is offered without expectation of recognition. This detachment ensures that giving does not deplete. Energy circulates rather than drains. At this point, the earlier fixation from others is largely irrelevant. The individual is no longer reacting to observation. They are operating from purpose. External narratives lose influence. Challenges still arise, but they are met differently. Instead of triggering identity-level stress, they are treated as logistical problems. Solutions are sought without emotional escalation. Discomposure increases resilience. Setbacks do not derail direction. They prompt adjustment rather than abandonment. The system adapts. Adaptation becomes smoother because it is anticipated. The individual expects change and plans accordingly. Flexibility is built into structure. This balance between structure and flexibility is crucial. It prevents brittleness. The individual can respond to new information without losing coherence. Over time, this creates a sense of trust in self. Not confidence based on outcomes, but trust based on process. Regardless of external conditions, the individual knows they can respond effectively. This trust reduces anxiety about the future. Planning becomes realistic rather than defensive. Hope is grounded rather than idealized. As the cycle completes, the individual recognizes that the earlier phases were necessary. The pressure, observation, and uncertainty served a purpose. They tested and strengthened internal systems. What remains is not perfection, but alignment. Not immunity from challenge, but capacity to navigate it. The final outcome is integration. The internal and external are no longer at odds. Values inform action. Action reinforces values. Life feels less fragmented. Decisions feel less conflicted. Direction feels clearer, even when the path is not fully visible. This clarity does not eliminate effort. It makes effort meaningful. And so the process concludes not with a dramatic ending, but with continuity. The individual moves forward steadily, without urgency, without resistance, not because attention has disappeared, but because it no longer matters. What matters now is execution, alignment, and sustained progress. The work continues. Quietly. And effectively.